My name's Wesley Littlefield with YourBassGuy.com, and today we're talking about the Wacky Rig. I will leave a link to all the products that we're using in the description below, and if you have any questions about how to rig the Wacky Rig or any other rig, let me know in the comments. But the Wacky Rig, it is one of the most effective rigs considering really how simple it is. I find myself going to it all the time when fishing is just brutal. When I can't get a bite, when I can't buy a bite with anything else, I will go to a Wacky Rig. So today we're gonna break down a little bit on how to rig it, as well as what soft plastics you should use and what hooks you should use. Let's start with how to rig a Wacky Rig. Like I said, it's really simple. You literally find the middle or about the middle of your soft plastic and run the hook through the middle of it. Sometimes you'll see people with, like, they'll put an O-ring on the soft plastic and actually run the hook in between the O-ring and the plastic, and this just helps save your plastic. I actually have never done that, but it makes sense that if you want to, you don't want to keep buying new plastics, then buy a little pack of O-rings and run your hook through it and save your money that way. But I'm just hard-headed and stubborn, and I always rig it through the middle. So you can see here, that's partly how I rig it, is actually like through the soft plastic in the middle, and then I actually run it perpendicular through the soft plastic in the middle. And then this one I have rigged on a different side. This is a EWG extra wide gap hook, and I really don't like this big of a hook, but it's all I had in my tackle box with me at the moment, so we're gonna run with it. I'd like a little bit smaller hook, but anyways, I ran this one parallel through it, as you can tell, and it just gives it a little bit different action. And you'd be surprised that I'd throw the exact same lure, just re-rigging in a different way in the same spot, however long it takes me to reel it in and re-rig it and cast it back out there, and I get hit, when it's parallel, and I didn't get hit when it's perpendicular, or I get hit when it's perpendicular and I didn't get hit when it's parallel. Just rigging it up a little bit differently can actually trigger those fish to get a bite. You can also, I like rigging it weightless, which would be what I would prefer, but you can also rig it Texas style. If you don't know what that is, it's just literally putting a lead weight on your line that's free running, or you can peg it down towards the bait itself, and you can run it that way if you're fishing a little bit deeper. And you can fish it with a jig head if you've got just a jig head. There's basically it looks like a big crappie jig head is all I can think. Can't think of what it's called, but you can fish it that way. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else I've ever fished it with, but my favorite is probably weightless, just because I can really cast it in there. You can cast it in shallow water. Now, if I am fishing deep, I will put weight on it just to get it down a little quicker. But for shallow water, and I'm saying shallow is anywhere from like 6 foot or less, maybe 8 foot. 8 foot's kind of pushing it. I'm gonna go weightless, because just having this thing slowly sink down in front of them, they just either get super annoyed with it, or it's finally they're just like, okay, I'm not hungry, but I'm gonna eat because it's there. Like, the box of donuts that's in front of you, you're like, oh no, I'm not gonna have one. And then 5 minutes later, man, that really looks good. Okay, I'm gonna have one. Kind of like what the fish is thinking. So there's, like I said, a thousand different ways, probably not 1,000 different ways, but a bunch of different ways to rig this. Now let's go into a little bit of the soft plastics. The plastics that I use, honestly, this is probably one of my favorites. And this is like it's called a rattlesnake, or there's like a baby rattlesnake, and I'm trying to think of who makes it, but I'll link it in the description below. But most people that you can look up on YouTube, you can search it all over, most people will use a Cinco, and I don't even have a Cinco with me right now, which is crazy, but this is close enough to what it would look like. It's just a small worm. Usually 4 or 5 inches is going to be plenty. I don't want a big giant worm on there because it'll just fall a little bit differently, and I usually tend to stick to I think this is a 4-inch rattlesnake, and then maybe a 4 or 5 inch Senko. The Senko will sink a little bit faster because it doesn't have the ribs and it's not as big. So if you want to go a little bit bigger Senko, you can, and still not have to worry about fall rate, which it's not going to fall too fast anyways. But in theory, you can rig anything Wacky Rig. You know, if you wanted to rig a 10-12 inch curly-tailed worm on there Wacky Rig, I mean, you could, but I don't think it's going to be very effective. That's why I tend to stick to these two, and maybe if I'm desperate I might try something else, but for the most part it's going to be, even this color right here is pretty much my go-to color. I've got black and blue, that's another good one, and this looks like it's got purple flake in it, and it's like a translucent black gray. And like I said, I catch fish on a lot of them. Wacky Rig is just a very effective way to catch fish. Let's talk a little bit about the hooks. You want to go with as small as a hook as you can get away with. So like this hook here is actually one of my drop shot hooks, and it's a really effective Wacky Rig hook because it doesn't get in the way. The fish are less likely to see it, and it's just effective. Now, I've caught a lot of fish using probably this hook or a very similar hook like this when I forget to pack it in my kayak or whatever, and a bit extra wide gap hook actually works. And I've even caught big fish on, you know, having this big hook exposed like this. You'd think, the fish might not like it, but most of the time if they get annoyed enough, they're gonna bite it. So if you have to, I mean, you can use any hook, but I would much rather use a little bit smaller hook than a bigger hook. Number one, this gets hung up a lot and the fish are more likely to see it, whereas this isn't as likely to get hung up and the fish aren't as likely to see it. So that's why I would choose a smaller hook. Spinning gear, I've thrown Wacky Rig, even weightless, I've thrown it on a cast with a casting rod and casting reel, and you're gonna backlash a lot more, especially if you have to cast into the wind or anything. So spinning gear is the #1 way to cast your Wacky Rigs. 10-pound test is really all you need. Unless you're fishing just like super heavy cover, then 10-pound test is about as much as I'm gonna go. I'm gonna stick with fluorocarbon line, and if you want to tie a leader to it, you can tie it to braid or whatever, but I'm gonna primarily stick 10, maybe 12. If it's heavy cover, I'll go 12 or a little bit more, but 8 to 10 is my go-to fishing a Wacky Rig. So that's it on the Wacky Rig. Any time of the year is a good time to fish a Wacky Rig. Honestly, when the fishing's tough in the summertime, it's my go-to bait. In the wintertime, it's slow enough moving that you can trigger a bite. In the spring and fall time, when they're, you know, especially before pre-spawn, during pre-spawn and everything, and then they're feeding in the fall, they're gonna hit a Wacky Rig. It's a year-round bait, especially in the shallows, to use. Other than that, guys, I mean, you just gotta go out there and learn and try it for yourself. I heard Skeet Reese recently say in an interview that, you know, the best way to learn to fish is to actually get out on the water and fish. So if you guys like this video, go ahead and give us a thumbs up and subscribe. And remember, education is important, but fishing is essential.